Hi there, today we're going to be discussing sexual violence on campus, prevention, intervention, and survivor support. This is our TA edition. My name is Robin Ocean and I'm the Sexual Violence Prevention and Peer Support Coordinator here at Trent. And my email address is robinocean@trentu.ca. You can also leave a message at my extension at 7792. What are we going to be discussing today? This is our agenda. What is our policy? What is sexual violence? What is consent? How can a TA support students? And what can I do to prevent and respond to sexual violence? These are important questions, and this is an ongoing conversation that we need to have. Why are we having this conversation? I just want you to ask yourself why you clicked on this presentation, what led you to this, why is it being shared, why are we spending time on this? Because it's not a matter of if you'll have a student disclose sexual violence, but when. This is a pervasive structural and societal problem. Whatever you imagine the amount of sexual violence to be, just multiply that by 10. Past trauma can easily influence a student's capacity to concentrate and perform in their academics and student life, and that comes into your classroom. As a TA, you are likely to be a trusted person for a student to disclose to. This could be in an assignment, in the class itself, or during office hours. So they might come to you and want to make sure that you feel confident in how to approach it. Remember that you might have personal experiences of sexual violence. It has touched all of us, or we know somebody who has been, who has experienced sexual violence. Things come up from you from this content, or when you're supporting a student, you don't have to face it alone. So connect with Human Resources to learn about your benefits. You might have the Employee Family Assistance Program, and that's with LifeWorks, and they're available 24/7. You might have benefits. Sharing is healing. So I'll just ask that you check in with yourself right now, see what you need. Do you need a glass of water? Are you going to take a breath? Are you in the space to hear about violence, consent, trauma? Just check in with yourself. This is the informed consent to continue. So if you continue to watch, it's because you feel like you're able. So thanks for joining us. First, I want to start with our policy. So if you go to trentu.ca/sexual violence, you'll see that we have our policy listed on every page. It's at the side on the right. And you all have a responsibility under the policy. So all members of the Trent community share the responsibility to create and maintain an environment free from sexual violence by not perpetrating sexual violence or perpetuating rape culture, and by conducting bystander interventions or getting help if it is not safe to intervene. An example of not perpetuating rape culture is that we have to believe survivors. When we don't believe survivors, that plays into rape culture and us not being able to take sexual violence seriously. The policy comes from a directive under Bill 132 to have standalone sexual violence policies and address gender-based violence on campus. For example, the Sexual Violence Survey in 2018 said that 70.9% of respondents of the survey who experienced sexual violence were very satisfied with Trent's response, and that put us first. It's great to be first, but I wish it was 100%. So the more skills that you have and everyone else in our community has, the more likely that people will be satisfied with the response from our institution. Here's a way to show that we are responding well. So what about if you had this philosophy that it's a pleasure to accommodate? So Trent sexual violence policy ensures supports and accommodations for those impacted by sexual violence. Accommodation is defined as academic accommodation, relocation of residence rooms, voluntary withdrawal from classes with full tuition refund, interim safety plans, and provision of supports and services. So much of that might be out of your control, but the idea of academic accommodation is, so practice the philosophy that it's a pleasure to accommodate. And we'll do that by upholding confidentiality. So what does confidentiality mean? It means protecting the identity and personal information of parties to an incident of sexual violence. Anybody involved, the person who is bringing the complaint or making the disclosure, and the people that the complaint or disclosure are about, protecting all of their identities. Any disclosure or report and information contained therein will be considered confidential, except when there is reasonable cause to believe that anyone, including the respondent, so that's the person that caused harm, is at risk of imminent physical harm. This includes self-harm, or if there's a concern about the safety or welfare of a child. If there's none of those concerns, you can hold this confidential. This means you do not even have to share it with your faculty. You may have to support an accommodation. Maybe you need your faculty to know that there's accommodation for the student, but that can be held with discretion. And you can always consult with me. I am included in this circle of confidentiality, and I can support you to figure these things out. You don't have to do it alone. But again, going to your faculty or another TA or your supervisor, whatever it looks like, and sharing details about the disclosure, you're breaking confidentiality. And if you don't have that harm to self or others or a child, there's no reason to breach that confidentiality. And it's really important that you keep it confidential. So what is sexual violence? Sexual violence is a broad term that describes any violence, physical or psychological, carried out through sexual means or by targeting sexuality. What that means is you're crossing a line that violates that person's boundaries, their sense of self, their autonomy, their body, their sexuality, their decisions, their self-determination. All of that is, when you cross a line, you're disturbing that. And when we disturb that, it's violating. And so you can consider an act of sexual violence to be a violation. And there's lots of different words we can use to understand it, but basically, if we're not respecting somebody, if we're not communicating properly, and if we respected someone, we would communicate properly. And if we're targeting somebody's gender identity, sexuality, body, and all the parts therein, if we don't respect that of that person, that can be an act of sexual violence. It doesn't have to be an assault. It could be something verbal, and that might be considered sexual harassment. And those are just a few of the examples. Let's talk more about examples of sexual violence. So there's stalking. That's considered gender-based and sexual violence because it could be related to dating, or it could be related to intimidating somebody and their body. And it could be related to often rejection. Someone is rejected or obsessed with somebody. So there's some like intimate behavior happening for the person that's doing the stalking. And so that's why it's considered gender-based violence, and it's not okay. Harassment, so again, it could be verbal, it could be cyberbullying, and that you might see that in your classes, especially now that we are currently online. It could be people making comments of other people's appearances, hypersexualizing somebody without their consent. Unsolicited nude photos, that might be shared in your academic online environment. You might be surprised by that, but it happens. So we want to notice it and call attention to it and respond appropriately. Dating violence and intimate partner violence. So that might just be happening in the world of your student, but it might come into the class. You might have two students who are seeing each other, and there's some coercion and control, and it's impacting somebody's self-determination. Again, crossing that line and violating their boundaries. Any abuse of a sexual nature, rough play without consent, again, without communicating and talking about things before something happens, you're likely to harm somebody. And so not caring enough to have that conversation means not respecting that person, and that's an act of sexual violence. And of course, assault. So what is consent? Consent is a clear and present, sober yes between equals. Clear means an unmistakable verbal agreement. That's that communication I was discussing. A yes yesterday isn't present. Just because we're in a relationship doesn't mean we don't have to keep checking in and making sure things are okay. Just because there was a yes yesterday or last week or for the past year doesn't mean it's a yes today. Drinking and using drugs is not sober. And if we can't think, we can't make decisions for ourselves. Maybe is a no. And using power over someone is not equals. And that could be in the relationship of a TA to a student. There's power over that student, and that means you're not equal. So you cannot have consent as a TA to date a student. Consent is necessary. When we don't have consent, it crosses that line into sexual violence. So what are some concerns you have in addressing sexual violence when a student discloses? I just want you to reflect on this. What comes up for you? What are you worried about? Some people are worried about, it's not my role. You know, I'm a TA, I'm not a counselor. Some people think, oh, this timing makes no sense. It's right before the exam. I don't have time to deal with this, or that's convenient. You start doubting. Those are just a few examples. It could be that it's just too hard. The topic is too complex and it's triggering and it's difficult. All of your concerns are valid. But if our concerns cross the line into not being able to support and respond in a good way, then that could be a further violation to that student. So learn some skills, consult with me. You don't have to figure it out alone, and work through the situation as best you can. You don't have to be a counselor. You can refer. Let's review some basics. A student discloses an experience of sexual violence. Let's say there's no safety risk, and mostly there won't be. So now that you're aware, acknowledge it. Don't ignore the student and the situation. It might be uncomfortable, but not acknowledging it is more uncomfortable. Reach out, see what supports they need. How can you help? You can debrief with me. That's another way of reaching out. You can reach back out if it's been a while since you've spoken to them and you just want to say like, hey, just thinking about what you shared with me. If there's any further support I can provide, please let me know. Compassion, that means responding with care. And why wouldn't we, right? Let's dig into our emotional stores and have that compassion, which means connecting with that person and their feelings and what's going on for them and being in their shoes and thinking this deserves time, space, and patience, having that kind of compassion. Confidentiality, have I mentioned that? Keep your privacy in mind. They trusted you enough to share. If you do not have consent to share that and it doesn't meet those safety thresholds we were just discussing, then you're crossing a line. That's another violation. So you see a theme here, right? We need to respect people's self-determination, their bodies, their time. That also means their stories. Provide non-judgmental support. You don't know better. You don't know what happened. You can't decide what they should do. And it's not up for you to know. Don't judge their response. Don't judge what happened. Don't judge how they move forward or don't move forward. It's just not your place. So what does it look like? Maybe you wish there was a chart that told you what to do about how to support a student. There is a chart. So step one is believe them, okay, and thank them for sharing. It's a very simple thank you. Step two is reassure them that it was not their fault. It's always good to say it's not your fault. And I like to put it into this kind of, this example is that I've been doing this work for 12 years and what percentage of people sitting next to me or talking to me on the phone think that it's their fault that they experience sexual violence? And it's 100%. So the more people that keep saying it's not your fault, the better, because society says it's your fault. Step three, ask them how they want to be supported. Again, about them being non-judgmental is that it's not up for you to decide what they need to do. You might think they should go to the police, they should go to the hospital. Even if you have experienced those yourselves, which maybe you haven't, you can say that, but then they're the ones that have to follow up. They're the ones that have to experience the police or the hospital. They're the ones that have to deal with whatever comes after that. You don't. So it's very easy and quick to say, you should go to the police, but you're not the one that has to deal with that over the next 2 years. So ask them how they want to be supported. How can I support you? And then respect what they have to do. That's step four. That's being non-judgmental. That's sharing compassion. And step five, when they're ready, you can share additional resources, but so can I. So you can leave that one up to me. So ask yourself, how do I support them? By listening. So don't ask any questions. You don't need to problem solve, fix the situation, or investigate. That's not your role. Believe them. That's free. It doesn't cost you anything to say, I believe you. It's not your fault. You can just have those ready. I believe you. It's not your fault. I believe you. It's not your fault. I practice saying I believe you all the time. For instance, if somebody says, oh, I have so much work to do, you don't even know, it feels like such an insurmountable task, I'll say, I believe you. Like, I just believe that you have so much work to do. It sounds like a lot. So we just need to practice believing and respecting people. Offer an academic consideration before they have to ask. Extending deadlines, switching seminars, accommodated participation. What can you offer, right? What can you share in terms of compassion? Offer to connect the student to me to talk about options and supports moving forward. I'll be that bridge for them, right? So when you think, oh, I'm scared of having this conversation, I'm not a counselor, you don't have to be. I'll sort that out with them if they want to connect with me. So whether a complaint is formal or informal, how do we respond? We take them seriously, we respond appropriately, we share resources, and we follow up with the student. It sounds simple, so use this philosophy to create the steps to support the student. One way we respond appropriately is that we don't overreact, right? We need to stay calm. If you're shocked by what happened, if you're shocked about the person that they name as the person who caused harm, hold that in and try to deal with your feelings on your own. Do not share disclosures. Have I mentioned this? Without the student's consent, you cannot forward to another TA or to the faculty so that they know about the accommodation. You cannot tell the admin assistant so they know why they're accepting an assignment late, whatever it looks like. Simply say, this student is permitted to, and insert accommodation there. Privacy. This is about confidentiality. I really can't say this enough, especially if you think like, this isn't my role, I don't know what to do. Then sharing it is even more of a violation because you might not know what to do, which means you're not taking into account the impact of sharing, of you sharing their story, and they could break trust and they could never want to reach out again. I'm saying that as a big example because that is what's at risk. They could never want to share again because their experience was shared without their consent. It's one more violation, it's one more crossing the line. So when to get help, right? We went through what confidentiality is, but there's some limits. So without the student's consent, you can't share their experience unless there's an imminent risk of serious physical danger to another person. They are an imminent physical danger to themselves, a child is being harmed, or when they are harmed by a staff member. That's something that we should probably talk about more. So what help to get? If you're not sure what kind of emergency it is, or even if it is an emergency, you can consult with security. They are available 24 hours a day. And so here's the contact information to make sure that you know where they are on the website. And you can just say, hey, I can't share very much, but this is what's going on. Is this an emergency? What can I do? An intervention is probably the most effective thing that we can do. When we witness an incident of sexual violence, it's harder to provide a meaningful response afterwards because the impact is so big. It's harder to do that than it would be to intervene. And in the moment is the best opportunity for justice and accountability, and therefore behavior change. Of course, unless it is unsafe to do it. And for some people, they have a bigger voice and more privilege to intervene. I understand. But there are times where we have the power to intervene. We just need to work on our embarrassment or discomfort or whatever is going on for us and intervene. And this is about you as a TA. What do you see in your classroom, right? So your role, you might think, I'm a student too, I'm close to their age, or I could date a student. Okay, I could date a former student. You might be thinking that they're not in my class anymore. There's no power imbalance. Or you might think there's just no power imbalance in a consensual relationship. Think again, you are in a responsible position of authority as a TA. And just because they're not in your class now, but they were in your class, they could be in your class again. Even if you think, oh, I'm graduating at the end of this year, who knows, maybe there'll be a research assistant job for you next year and you'll still be around. Now that you've dated that student, how does that potentially come into conflict with their capacity to be a research assistant later on that team or to work with you in that moment, or what happens if a relationship goes badly? But more importantly, you could really cause a lot of harm to somebody because you could be using your power and coercion or even perceived power. You might think, I don't have power, but you do because you are a paid staff and perhaps in a position where that student wants to get to because they are an undergrad, you are a grad student. There's just so much happening there that we can't know that the line isn't being crossed. We can't know that there's no consent or there is consent. We can't know. We can't know if there is coercion. You might say that there was consent. Someone says there wasn't consent and you had power over them. They are correct. So the black and white of it is that you have to be equals in order to consent. And so you're not equal as a TA with your student. One slide about trauma. I know it's a lot to pack in, but I just want to say that the impact of crossing that line is huge. And options for recovery are also big. And there's hope and there's post-traumatic growth. There's a lot of things. But if somebody is harmed, especially of a sexual nature, it's so intimate. Here are some things that can be caused if that trauma isn't processed. They'll have physical, emotional, and behavioral cognitive impacts. It could be from, low energy, headaches, their physical body hurts. Emotional ones are depression and anxiety are number one, and they could feel guilt or shame that might make them avoid or draw in. They might turn to substance or alcohol use because they want to forget it. They maybe turn to disordered eating because they want to be able to control something because their life has been out of control by the impact of this trauma. And cognitively, this is what you might see in your classroom. They have an inability to concentrate. Their memory lapses. It makes it difficult for them to do tests, especially. They're very distracted. They have a lot of different thoughts coming in, and all of this just creates kind of a storm within a person, and they need support, and they need to be believed, and they need to be trusted in order to build bridges to recovery. So you might ask yourself, what can I do to prevent sexual violence? Well, the most powerful thing you can do is not perpetrate sexual violence. So this is asking for consent and role model consent. Okay, and so that's why I asked you to think again. Like, oh, there's no power imbalance between me and a student. Think again, right? Because it's not worth the impacts of trauma just to have someone to date. Also, do you have a kid? You can teach that child not to be ashamed of their body, sex, or sexuality. Shame leads to sexual violence, and we need to work on this in our society. We need to redistribute wealth and privilege. Inequity causes sexual violence because it designates some people as disposable, and then they experience more disproportionate sexual violence incidences and then impacts, because then every part of the system that also designates them as disposable doesn't give them justice, the health system, the education system, the legal system, etc. So stand up against toxic masculinity. That's just one part of what causes rape culture and sexual violence to continue. So harmful stereotypes, rigid gender roles, we need to stand up and counter those and hold people accountable, even if it's friends and colleagues. The most powerful thing you can do is the power of a peer, is to say, did you do that? I heard that you did that. I am so upset to think that you could do something like that. You need to get help. It's not okay that you did that. That is a more powerful conversation than if the institution does something, right? So use your relationship in a way that is going to create change. That's powerful. So let's review. Listen to the person who's providing the disclosure. Be non-judgmental. Take everything that you think that you know, or all the concerns or worries you have, and kind of put them aside. And refer to the Sexual Violence Prevention Coordinator. Refer to me. So just so you know, they don't have to connect with me, but you have to share my contact with them. That's how to close that loop, right? So, you can say no pressure. Robin is here if you need her. Here's her contact information. Or you could say, I can send an email connecting you with Robin so she can follow up with you. There's no pressure. It's just so you have her contact. Okay? That's how you're closing the loop. You're saying, I'm taking this seriously. I'm responding appropriately. I'm not panicking. I'm not letting my feelings cloud it. I'm not investigating or being judgmental. I'm just saying, thank you for sharing. I believe you. I think this is important. I hope that you know that there are other people you can speak to about this. How can I support you with your academics? And can I connect you to Robin? She's the Sexual Violence Prevention Coordinator. Is that possible? Is that approachable? Is that meaningful? Can you do that work? I hope that you can. And if you want to talk with me about a specific case, because it's been a while since you had this learning and you maybe think, oh, I'm missing something, talk to me. Let's see what's missing. Okay, you did it. You crushed it. You had a difficult conversation. You're supporting your students by taking this time to understand this topic more. And that's a really important step. Thank you again for your time. My name is Robin Ocean, and you can email me at robinocean@trentu.ca. Take care and good luck.